And hello everyone, welcome back to another Love2D tutorial. So in the previous tutorial we worked on the menu. In this tutorial we'll be working a little bit with the scoring system and improving the enemy a bit. So let's actually start with the enemy. Let's actually try and improve the enemy. So first off, I would like us to actually now receive a level. Now level is basically going to allow us to say what level every enemy should be. Because we can have 10 enemies in the game, like just coming at you. But the problem is without the right leveling method, those enemies will just be kind of the same thing. Won't really be difficult or anything like that. So what we can do is we can go here where it says level, and instead of saying 1, we just make level equal to level. And just in case we didn't pass in a level, but usually you would be passing in a level, but just in case we were not, we can just say, or let's say 1. And you could also, if you want to make this underscore level instead of level to make it a bit easier to understand. Although I think this is perfectly fine. You could even rename this to be LBL instead. Alright. So that's all we're going to do here for now. We will be getting back to this later, but right now I think it's perfectly fine. You probably want to know how we're going to kind of get the enemies and stuff to come in. So I'm going to show you an example of what we will basically be doing. So here I have basically what we're going to be doing. So when we say play game, we will have a little scoreboard here that is going to count. And then once this scoreboard gets to a specific amount, like 15, it's going to spawn another enemy with a higher level. The higher the level, the faster the enemy will be. A good thing you might want to do is you might want to make every enemy a different color, maybe randomly generated or something like that. And then once the enemy touches you, the game ends. We'll later on implement an end screen or a game over screen and whatnot. But that's the basics of what we're going to implement. So we need to implement some sort of point system. Alright, so here inside of game, we can actually implement it here. So the amount of points we have, we can make equal to 0 at start. You could also put this inside of the player here. So then the amount of points the player has, but you could also make the amount of points there currently is in the game. So whichever floats your boat best. And in here we could say levels. And this will basically be whenever an enemy spawns. You can either have set levels like I am doing now, or you can have randomly generated levels or levels at every specific interval, something like that. But I'm just going to have 4 levels, 5 if you include the very first level, and these levels will basically just be 15, 30, 60 and 120. So if you have these points, so 15, 30, 60 and 120, like that. So if the player has 15 points, then a new enemy will spawn. If they have 30 points, then a third enemy will spawn, because you have the first enemy, which is from 0 to 14. Then you have a second enemy from 15 to 29. A third enemy from 30 to 59. And then a fourth enemy from 60 to 119. And then the last enemy at level 120 and above. So let's implement the points. So here with new game, we can just say game.points is equal to 0. So this is basically whenever we start a new game, we're going to set the points to 0. And now with these enemies here, we actually want to do something but different. We want to go enemies. So we want to create an entirely new enemies table. So we're going to clear the previous enemies table. And we can just say enemy and then at level 1, like that. That means we can remove that line there because we have our enemy here. This will be the very first enemy at level 1. You can do it like this, or you can have it split up into multiple lines. So right here, where we do the love.update, inside of the game state, or inside of the if game state is running, this part right here, we want to just say game.points is equal to game.points plus dt. So this will basically increase the points constantly, but with dt, so 0.016 or 0.032, however, so basically about every second you'll get 1 point. Now, when we go down to draw, we can find a way to actually display this to the user. So here in if game state is running, we can actually put it just above enemies so the enemies can move over it. But you can put it below enemies as well. We can say love.graphics.printf, and this will print text to the screen. We can say math.floor game.points, and this will display the game points but to the lowest value. So if we have 3.14, it will display 3. If we have 3.55, it will display 3. If we have 29.99, it will display 29. So it's basically like math.round, but just always downwards and never upwards. We can then specify a font, because with love graphics print, you might notice we need to specify a font. So let's just say let's just copy this. Now we want it to be bigger than something like the FPS, because it has to attract more attention than the FPS. So we can make this about 24 instead of 16. Then here we can basically put our location, so 0, 10, and then we can tell it how long to span. So love.graphics.getWidth, and then we can also just specify center. So all of this does a lot, but basically you can think of it as displaying the text at the center of the screen. And I'll show you how this looks in a second. So let's actually try to run this and see if it works. So love. Alright, we say play game, and here it does. So it's here at the center of the screen, near the top, and yeah, it just counts about every second. I believe this 0 here is the X. So if we were to make this something like 90, and we run it, then you'll notice it's a bit more to the right. So the 0 is basically the X, and this 10 is basically the Y. Cool, and then this here just specifies you want it to be basically aligned to the center. Nice. Now before we get to the enemy, I would like to implement a better way to change the game state, because currently the way we change the game state, we have to constantly go around and we have to change a bunch of things manually, which isn't what we want. We want to make it as simple as possible, so in the future when we return, we never forget about something we might have to change if we change this value here, or if we add this here. Alright? So let's say local, and we create a function. We can call it change game state. I can take in state, then here we can say game.state menu. So the game state is menu, or we actually just make it state is equal to menu. So we basically say make game state menu, so true or false, if the state passed in is equal to menu. So if we pass in menu here, it's going to make this value here that. And we can do the same for all 4 of our current states. So paused, and here we can say running, and here we can say, and then we say ended. So we never have to worry about changing another game state, because here it will automatically make things true and false as we want it. So for example, here where we do this, instead of having to set 2, 3, 4, 5 states here, we just call change game state like this, and we want to set it to running like that. And that will just make our life so much easier. Since now whenever we change the game state, we don't have to, everywhere we want to change it, we don't have to constantly basically be doing this. Because now we have a function. Let's make sure this works. So if I press play game, it should start the running state. And it does. Alright. So next up we should maybe work on getting if the enemy has touched the player. If the enemy has touched the player, the game should end because the player has lost. Because that's the point of the game. So what we can do is we can go here to enemy.lua and we can implement a new function. Check touched. Now this check touched will contain a function, and this function will take in self, player X, player Y, so the player X and Y position, and then also the cursor radius, like that. And I did explain a lot of this in the previous tutorials, so I do recommend you go watch that if you have not, where I do explain a lot of collision detection math there as well. So now we just basically need to detect if the enemy is anywhere near the player. There's going to be some interesting math here, so just bear with me for a second. Math.square root. So SQRT for square root. And I'm going to create 2 brackets here so I don't get confused with mathematical operations, and so Lua knows what to do first. Self.x, so basically the enemy current X position, minus player underscore X, so the player current X position, to the power of 2. And I'll explain this in a second. Then you can say plus and then another pair of brackets, self.y minus player underscore y. And we just say times or to the power of 2 less or equal to cursor radius times 2. So basically this math here will check if the player is inside of the enemy. So it's basically like the previous one, just kind of in one line to make it easier for us. You could split this up into multiple lines again, very similar to what we did here inside of the button check pressed. You could make it very similar to this. Not exactly like this because, you know, one is a square, the other is a circle. But hint here, both of them are circles. But this will basically, in a sense of argument drawing app here, it will do this. So this is the enemy. This is the player. Whoa. Now in this scenario, so this is the game scenario, it would be false. Now our math will basically check this. This is the enemy. This is the player. Now that will return true. So it will just basically check if the enemy or the player is touching each other. Because if so, then they are colliding, meaning the player has lost. So yeah. If you want to know more about this math, I do recommend you do go maybe refresh up on some mathematical things you can do with circles, because this is one of the things that works with that. Alright, so once you have that, you have your collision detection. Now with your collision detection, we can finally do some coding to actually see it do something. So let's go here to the running state right here. So inside of this for loop, we're going to increase a few things here. So increase the amount of lines. So right here, we can say if not enemies at index I, and we're getting this right here. if not enemies at index I, check touched. And this check touched will just basically execute this math right here to check if the player is inside of the enemy. Then once you have this, you can just say player.x, player.y, player.radius. Because this check touched needs three things: player X, player Y, and then the cursor radius, which are all provided here. This will check if it is touched. So while it is not touched, as you can see there, because that has a not. So this will check if it's not true. So if this does not call true, if it's not being touched, then, and in here all of our things will happen. But let's first code the else, because this is a quick one. It's just change game state to menu. Later on, this will change the game state to ended and whatnot, but we don't really have anything for those states. So currently it will just change the state back to menu. And see, this is why this change state is so useful, because now we just call this and it will do all of the other background stuff for us. Now this enemies.move here, or this enemy move, we can move it there. So the enemy can move. So we can now say for I is equal to 1 in game.levels do. So we're saying for I becomes 1 in game.levels. You could call this something else even if you wanted to, because we have an I here. So you might want to call this something like J or K or some other value. And game.levels, and game.levels is right up here. So it's 15, 30, 60, 20. So we're saying for I equals 1 through that. We can go if math.floor, it again, this is to make sure we round down. Game.point, and this is the points we have scored up until this point, if you can remember. And we can say if that is equal to game.levels at index I, then we want to say table.insert and enemies 1 and then enemy and game.difficulty times I plus 1. So what are we doing here? We're basically saying insert into the enemies table at position 1 an enemy that has the game.difficulty. So the game difficulty is basically being set up here, so it's 1. So in this case it's just going to be 1, but if you want to increase the game difficulty, then you can, times, in this case it's going to be 1 plus 1, which is 2. But if this I increases, this would be 2 plus 1, which is 3. And then this will basically increase the enemy difficulty or the enemy level as things go on. We did implement the leveling thing with the enemy in the previous vid. I think it's actually in the 2 videos ago, not the previous video. So let's see here. And let's just search level. Yeah, there we go. So self.level in the move. So we did implement working with levels, so we didn't have to mess with that now because we did it before. And then this is both to avoid bugs and to kind of tell the player, you have done this. We give the player 1 bonus point. So game.points is equal to game.points plus 1. So we gave them 1 bonus point as well as trying to avoid a bug. Because otherwise, this for loop is going to run multiple times, because dt is going to take a while before it goes 1 full point, because it's like 0.016 or 0.032. So yeah, we have to be careful with that. So we give it 1 extra point so it can also break out of the loop. There are also other ways to deal with it, but this is the easiest way I find to go around it. Now once you have that, you can just save your game or your code and let's see if it works. Play game. Okay, so here's the first enemy. We wait until we get to 15 to see for the second enemy. And here we go. So now there are 2 enemies. If we are willing to wait to 30, we should see a third enemy. That is even faster. Yeah, as you can see there. And then once one of them touches us, we just go back to our main menu. And yeah, that is it for this tutorial. We just implemented a basic point system, and we implemented the basics of adding more enemies. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all again in the next Love2D tutorial.